Ridge Forrester had always believed he understood his father better than anyone else alive, that he knew Eric's heart, Eric's ambitions, and the legacy Eric wanted to leave behind. But that belief shattered in seconds the moment he laid eyes on the document that would flip his world upside down. Eric's will, signed, dated, witnessed, and stamped with finality. A stark declaration of Eric's wishes that Ridge never imagined he would read while his father was still alive, breathing, and fighting to hold on to dignity in a world that suddenly felt as fragile as glass. The room felt too small, too cold, too silent except for the roaring in Ridge's ears as line after line blurred into a betrayal he could not wrap his head around, and he tried to convince himself there had been a mistake, a misunderstanding, a forgery even, anything that made more sense than the truth staring up at him in bold black lettering stating that Eric Forrester, the man Ridge had spent his life trying to please, to honor, to protect, had chosen another successor. Not him. Not the son who had poured sweat and soul into Forrester Creations for years, but Steffi, his own daughter. The realization hit him like a punch to the chest, a hard crack shattering every expectation he had carefully built. And for a moment Ridge just stood there, frozen, unable to breathe, unable to think beyond the numbing disbelief that was quickly morphing into something much darker, hotter, and far more explosive. How could Eric do this? How could Steffi accept this? How could the legacy of Forrester, a legacy Ridge believed was his birthright, be stripped away with the swipe of a pen and the decision of a father who had been drifting further from clarity each passing day? His fingers dug into the paper, knuckles widening, jaw tightening, as memories of every argument, every power struggle, every time Eric questioned Ridge's leadership flashed through his mind, and suddenly the truth felt undeniable. Eric never trusted him fully, never saw him as the rightful torchbearer of the Forrester Empire, and that cutting doubt hurt more than any rivalry or business failure ever could. Across the room, Steffi stood tall, composed with a quiet fire behind her eyes, not smug, not apologetic, but resolute, as if she had anticipated this moment and prepared herself for the inevitable storm Ridge would unleash, because she knew him, she knew the pride that fueled his heartbeat, and she knew the fury that would detonate the second that paper hit his hands. And she wasn't wrong. Ridge's voice broke the silence first in a low growl that rapidly built into a booming roar, demanding to know what kind of manipulation had taken place, who had convinced Eric that he needed a new CEO, a new protector of his company, who had preyed on a sick man's vulnerability because Ridge refused to believe this was Eric's true, clear-minded desire. But Steffi didn't flinch. Instead, she stepped forward, chin lifted, insisting that this was exactly what Eric wanted. That Eric had never been more sure of anything in his life than the choice to preserve the future of the company he found it in the hands of someone who understood progress, innovation, and unity, not ego, rivalry, and stubborn old grudges. Those words sliced deep, and Ridge snapped back, eyes blazing, spitting accusations that Steffi had pushed this, orchestrated it, exploited Eric's condition for power, for control, the same control Ridge had been clinging to as if his identity depended on it, because in many ways it did. Forrester Creations wasn't just a business to Ridge. It was his legacy, his validation, proof that he could fill his father's shoes and eventually surpass the legend himself. To lose that, to lose it to someone he helped raise, mentored, encouraged, felt like the cruelest twist the universe could deliver. The heated exchange escalated with every breath until Eric, frail but determined, interrupted, his voice thin but steady, declaring that the decision was his and his alone, that he had watched Ridge for decades lead the company with brilliance, but also with impulsive recklessness, driven too often by personal vendettas rather than the greater good, and that Steffi was the one who represented the future now. A future built not on rivalry, but on vision and unity. Ridge's anger skyrocketed, and he yelled, almost pleading that Eric was taking away everything he had ever worked for, everything he believed he was destined to become. And Eric, with pain etched across his features, whispered that Ridge had not lost his father's love, only the role he believed he was entitled to, reminding him that family mattered more than a title printed on an office door. But Ridge wasn't ready to hear any of it. It felt like betrayal, like abandonment, like his worst fears, that he would never be enough in his father's eyes. had finally been confirmed in the most devastating way possible. And then came the revelation that broke him further. There wasn't just one change in the will. There was another clause, one that ensured Ridge would not regain the CEO seat even after Eric passed, because Eric believed the company needed new blood, new leadership, and continuity that didn't rely on the chaos Ridge left in his wake. That part Steffi had kept hidden until now, because she knew the explosion it would cause, but there was no more time for secrets. Ridge's scream echoed through the mansion, raw with heartbreak and rage. A terrifying sound that made Donna rush into the room, fighting back tears, trying to calm him, trying to explain that Eric only wanted peace in his final days, not war, not family torn apart again by the same old battles that had haunted them for decades. But peace was impossible right now. Ridge accused everyone, Donna, Steffi, even Carter for drafting the will, of betraying him, of conspiring to destroy his place in his own family's legacy. Steffi, frustrated yet determined, reminded him that she had been the one stepping up while he was distracted with personal dramas, romantic disasters, and vendettas against Bill, against Thomas, against anyone who dared challenge him. Forrester Creations needed a steady leader, not a man constantly pulled in different directions by emotion and pride. Eric looked at Ridge then with a heartbreaking softness, saying that leadership isn't claimed through force. It's earned through trust, and right now, the one he trusted the most was Steffi. The room spun for Ridge, memories of childhood, of sketching designs beside Eric, of dreaming about the day he would take over the company, of every sacrifice he believed proved he deserved that destiny, and now it was slipping away from him like sand through his fingers. His voice cracked as he demanded to know if Eric even believed he was a good son, and Eric reached out, a trembling hand trying to reassure the man he loved deeply, telling him that this decision was not about love, but about legacy and survival. But Ridge couldn't accept that separation. His identity had been fused to the company for so long that hearing the legacy would continue without him was unbearable. He lashed out again, at Steffi, calling her power-hungry, at Donna, calling her clingy and interfering, at Carter, calling him a snake dressed in a suit, and finally at Eric himself, accusing him of choosing the wrong child to continue the Forrester dynasty. For a moment, Eric's eyes glistened with pain so heavy it silenced even Ridge. And in that silence, Eric said quietly that he had always believed Ridge would be strong enough to accept change, to honor his father's wishes, not fight against them. Ridge felt the floor drop from under him, because beneath all the rage lay a deeper terror. Losing his father, losing the man who had defined his entire life, and now being told he wasn't the chosen heir felt like being told he wasn't ready to stand alone. Steffi stepped closer, softening for just a moment, telling him she didn't want to take anything from him, that she wanted them to work together to strengthen Forrester Creations side by side. But Ridge rejected the olive branch, accusing her of smiling while stabbing him in the back. His pride wouldn't allow acceptance, not today, maybe not ever. Instead, he vowed that he would not step aside, not sign anything, not relinquish control, even if he had to fight legally, publicly, and emotionally to keep his title. And that vow marked the birth of a new civil war inside the Forrester family, one unlike any before, because this time the stakes weren't just business, they were personal in every way a wound can be personal. Eric's breathing grew shallow, Donna begging them both to stop before stress took the little strength Eric had left, but neither Ridge nor Steffi backed down. They stood locked in a battle of wills, father caught between them, time ticking down like a drumbeat marking the end of an era. Ridge stormed out finally, slamming the door, his footsteps echoing like thunder down the hall, leaving Steffi shaken yet resolute, knowing the fight ahead would push every limit of loyalty and love, but confident that she was the right one to lead the company forward. Eric collapsed back into his chair, exhausted, tears slipping silently as Donna held his hand and Steffi stared at the will, fully aware that the lines written there would change the family forever. That Ridge's scream would only be the first shockwave of a much bigger explosion. Because now the question wasn't just who would lead Forrester Creations, it was whether Ridge could ever forgive the people he loved most, and whether the Forresters could survive yet another war fueled by ego, legacy, and the desperate fear of being forgotten. And outside that room, Ridge pressed a trembling hand to the wall, breathing hard, not just furious, but heartbroken, terrified, and determined that he would not let this be the end of his story. He would reclaim what he believed was his, even if it meant going up against his own father, his own daughter, and the very foundation of his family. And as the sun set over the Forrester estate, casting long shadows across the walls, it was clear that a storm had begun. A storm that would only grow stronger, louder, and more devastating as Ridge Forrester declared war against the future his father had chosen without him. But Ridge's war wasn't just against his family. It was against himself, the voice inside him that whispered the truth he refused to hear. That Eric's confidence in him had been shaken long before this moment, chipped away by every impulsive decision, every feud he escalated, every time he let his heart dictate business. And that realization, buried under anger, stalked him as he paced the mansion halls like a caged animal, replaying every word Eric had spoken, every defiant look Steffi had given him, feeling humiliation burn beneath his skin hotter than rage itself. He stormed into the living room, sending a vase crashing to the ground, shards scattering like the legacy he believed was now shattered. And the chaos he created was the only thing drowning out the panic building in his chest, because panic meant vulnerability, and Ridge had spent his entire life pretending vulnerability didn't exist for him. But alone, the facade cracked, his breath hitching as he stared at the broken glass and saw his own reflection fractured in 100 disconnected pieces, symbolic of everything Eric's decision had splintered inside him. He wiped his face angrily, as though wiping away the weakness, promising himself that he would regain control, that this was not final, that wills could be contested, influence could be overturned, and Eric could be reminded of the son he truly had, not the version clouded by illness and manipulation. Meanwhile, upstairs, Steffi sat beside Eric, holding his hand as he tried to rest, guilt and determination fighting inside her. She loved her father and grandfather fiercely, but love didn't erase the weight of taking the reins from someone who believed they were born to lead. She knew Ridge's pain was real, even if his reaction was destructive, and part of her wished there had been another way. Yet she also knew that allowing Ridge to remain CEO could be the undoing of everything Eric had built. Donna dabbed a cool cloth over Eric's forehead, whispering reassurance, insisting that things would calm down. But Eric had lived long enough to know storms only worsen before they pass. And this one, fueled by Ridge's wounded pride, would test every fragile bond within their family. Downstairs, Thomas approached cautiously, having heard the eruption from afar, and he asked what happened, though deep down he already knew Ridge didn't handle losing power well. Ridge spun toward him, eyes wild, growling that Eric had rewritten the future, stolen what was meant to be Ridge's, and Thomas, surprisingly calm, asked if maybe this wasn't about stealing but about evolving, a statement Ridge interpreted as betrayal, another knife in the back he wasn't prepared to feel. He yelled that Thomas had no right to defend Steffi when the decision cut just as deeply into Thomas's future. If Steffi held power, Thomas would be under her command once again. And if that didn't bother him, then maybe Thomas was more naive than Ridge thought. But Thomas wasn't threatened by Steffi's leadership. If anything, he had grown enough to respect it. And he reminded Ridge that family shouldn't tear itself apart over a title, knowing full well Ridge would ignore that logic until it suited him. Ridge shoved past him, grabbing his phone as though calling a lawyer would magically erase the ink on the will. But Thomas warned him not to escalate this legally, that Eric needed peace right now more than anything, and if Ridge truly cared, he would put Eric's health above his ego. Ridge nearly snapped back with another shout, but something in Thomas's voice, a calm strength that mirrored the maturity Eric admired, silenced him for just a moment, long enough for the fear behind the fury to flicker through his eyes. Then he dismissed Thomas with a bitter laugh, sarcastically congratulating him on being another who believed Ridge no longer deserved to lead. He exited the mansion into the cool night air, gasping as though surfacing from deep water, and the darkness surrounding the estate matched the darkness gnawing at his thoughts. He had spent a lifetime defining himself as Eric's successor, and now that definition had been ripped away, leaving him adrift, unsure who he was without that crown. Yet his determination to fight burned brighter with every shaky breath he took. Across town, at the Cliff House, Finn was shocked when Steffi called to tell him what happened, and he could hear the fear in her voice. Fear not of Ridge's threats, but of losing the family unity she fought so hard to maintain. Finn promised to stand beside her, to protect her, just as she had protected their children, and his steady voice grounded her for a moment in a day that had spiraled into chaos. But Steffi knew this wasn't just a business battle. It was a generational war, one where every old wound could be reopened and every buried resentment could claw its way back into daylight. She sighed, staring out the window into the darkness, knowing Ridge was somewhere out there drowning in the feeling of betrayal, and that when a man like Ridge felt cornered, he didn't retreat, he attacked. Back at the mansion, Donna persuaded Eric to rest, though sleep was impossible for a man haunted by the heartbreak in his son's voice. He lay back, eyes closed, recalling the countless times he had watched Ridge struggle to balance emotion with judgment, and he prayed that in time Ridge would understand that this decision wasn't punishment but protection for the company and, deep down, for Ridge himself. Donna sat quietly beside him, mourning the happiness that should have come from building a legacy, not fighting over it, and wondering how many more battles Eric's heart could endure. Thomas returned to the living room, staring at the shattered vase, understanding all too well what it symbolized, and he picked up the pieces carefully, promising himself that he wouldn't let Steffi shoulder this burden alone, even if Ridge refused to listen. On the other side of Los Angeles, Ridge drove aimlessly, headlights slicing through the night, replaying obsessive questions. What more could he have done? Why was he never enough? How could Steffi betray him like this? How could Eric give up on his own son? Each one adding fuel to a fire already spiraling out of control. Eventually he pulled over near the beach, the same beach where so many Forrester memories had been made. Weddings, reconciliations, heartbreaks, and as the waves crashed relentlessly against the shore, he felt as though the universe was mocking him with a reminder that life moved on whether Ridge was ready or not, and leadership, just like the tide, shifted without mercy. His chest tightened, and he punched the steering wheel, letting out another scream that dissolved into the roar of the ocean. But as his anger drained into exhaustion, Ridge realized that returning home without a plan would make him look defeated. And Ridge Forrester was never defeated. He simply regrouped. A new plan began to take shape, one built not on emotional pleas, but on strategy, influence, and the undeniable truth that he had supporters within Forrester Creations who would never accept Steffi as the head of the company. He would speak to shareholders, allies, anyone willing to stand by the legacy he represented, and he would make sure Steffi understood that becoming CEO wasn't as simple as accepting her name in print. The seat came with lions ready to protect their territory, and Ridge was the fiercest lion of them all. Meanwhile, Steffi returned home later, children asleep, Finn watching her with worried eyes as she dropped onto the couch, exhausted by the emotional war she had just stepped into. She confessed that despite her confidence, part of her wished her grandfather had chosen a path that didn't divide them, and Finn assured her that sometimes leadership required breaking comfort to build progress. She nodded, knowing she was strong enough to face Ridge, but the fear that this battle could cost them the family unity she cherished most kept gnawing at her heart. The night stretched on, heavy with tension that seeped into every corner of Los Angeles, because Forrester battles weren't just business disagreements, they were storms that dragged everyone into their wins. And so it began, Ridge ready to call in every favor he'd ever earned, Steffi bracing for attacks from the father she adored yet infuriatingly could not calm, Eric praying this war wouldn't be the last chapter of the family he built from love and ambition, Donna fearing that the heartbreak would push Ridge further than forgiveness could ever reach, Thomas trying to keep peace while preparing for the inevitable next blow, and Finn promising to hold Steffi together no matter how hard Ridge pushed. The house might have quieted, but the war was only growing louder in the hearts of everyone involved. Because this wasn't just about a will, it was about identity, about legacy, about a man terrified of losing the purpose he believed was written in his DNA, and another determined to ensure the future of a company didn't collapse under the weight of the past. And as the first hints of sunrise crept over the coastline, Ridge stood alone watching the horizon, conviction hardening in his eyes. Eric's signature may have redrawn the future, but Ridge Forrester was not stepping aside, not bowing out, not surrendering to the idea that his daughter, his own flesh and blood, had replaced him as heir to the throne. The war for Forrester Creations had just begun, and in war, sons and fathers alike would bleed before anyone claimed victory.